Art Bennett, welcome to the Always Hope podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great today, Mario. Thank you very much. It's an honor to
Oh,
be here.
it's a sincere honor. The pleasure is all mine. I mean, I was just telling you right before we started recording that I first discovered the book, the Temperament God Gave You, probably sometime in 2007, 2008. I graduated my master's in 2006, and I went to a secular program, but it was always kind of desiring to figure out how to integrate my faith within my work. And I kind of had a good foundation coming out of college, and grateful for the campus ministry that formed me well. And my wife and I, we did a couple years of missionary work in between it,
Oh, wow.
undergraduate and then graduate studies. Um, so then, kind of graduating and starting to kind of dive into like this world of Catholic counseling, Catholic psychology. What did this look like? I discovered your book, and I was like, man, this is great. This is somebody who really kind of takes this seriously, that isn't overly spiritual, but doesn't disregard the science, like that finally has like a good balance with it. And I really felt that, at least for me, maybe I'm wrong, but it was kind of one of the early, there's like this second wave that kind of happened in kind of Catholic integrated psychology, if we can say that. The first wave would be like Witz and Barr and Groeschel and kind of these early thinkers. But then kind of in the last 20 years, there's been this boom of like thinkers and clinicians in training locations and graduate schools and all this other stuff that's happened. And I feel like your book was kind of at the forefront of all of that.
Wow.
What, what do you think about that, Art?
Well, that's high praise. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. I agree about the first wave. That's actually very interesting. I think you're right about that. And the people you mentioned, Paul Witz he's a Northern Virginian here,
Mhm.
having a tremendous impact on people. I see our book as more like of the self-help variety
Mhm.
as opposed to the kind of real highbrow research or stuff. I'm not a researcher, nor is my
Sure.
wife. So, it's just more of a practical bent. I'm licensed as a marriage therapist and also always been in management. So kind of how to motivate people to change and grow has been a big issue for me. So the temperaments kind of fit with that. We never try to be too highbrow, but
Mhm.
also we try not to say more than we know. But it's a very practical bent. I think just as it was not easy to integrate Catholicism with mental health. I mean, Freud came out swinging.
He
I
did.
guess he had to. And I want to be more empathic to the big guy. He's trying to create a science, and in Vienna, creating a science in the 1880s or 90s, that meant you had to really put religion aside.
Mhm.
But he did it really aggressively. So I think it probably cost us about 50 years of the opportunity to unite. But I think when John Paul II started his 129 discussions on Wednesday afternoons about sex, showed that the church has not only caught up, but has a real important role to play, I think, in the integration. So anyhow,
Well,
this
even
was our
before John Paul II in Love and Responsibility, in that final
well, that's
chapter,
right.
he's
So
talking
yeah,
about sexology. So even there, you're seeing this thinking happening already in the church in terms of
right.
kind
A,
of
a
what.
bishop
Yeah.
cardinal
Hmm.
who's really comfortable with that, and yeah, so I think he was really critical to getting kind of beyond the antipathy between psychology or psychiatry, especially in
Right.
Catholic Church, and now we were the beneficiaries of that integration that we could write about both those things. But yeah, I'm surprised, 16 years later, 17 years later, whatever, people still read the books. It's kind of cool. But yeah, I don't know. We didn't have any high-minded ideals like that. We were just try to get something out that people had shown interest in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's wonderful. Well, so
Yeah.
like let's just start there in terms of what does Catholic integrated mental health, look for you? Like what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
And I had to say we're both LMFTs, marriage and family therapists.
Yeah.
There's LPCs, counseling. Just telling the listener, it's a word soup, all right? When it comes to like mental health profession, like we're not
Yeah.
all psychologists, but we all do study the psychological sciences. And so finding the balance in the word here. So we're going to use counseling, psychology, mental health services interchangeably, much to the chagrin of my counseling professors. So
Yeah. I was good. I was
let's
glad you
just say,
clarified that. Yeah, yeah. Maybe as LMFTs, common licensed marriage family therapists, we might be more relational
right,
oriented as opposed to isolated
sure,
individuals. So it
sure,
might be true.
systemic
Yeah, that's
thinking,
right.
absolutely.
Systemic. Yeah. Yeah. So, I grew up in I grew up in California where marriage therapy was very popular. So when I decided to become a clinician, that was the easiest and most available means. And I studied with some real good family therapists in the Palo Alto area.
Oh,
Dick
really?
Fish
Wow,
and
that's amazing.
Bosselwick, Weekland and Fish, and the brief therapy guys. That
Yeah.
was just luck on my part and fortune. And
Was Whitaker out there
uh,
also at some point?
who's that?
Wasn't Carl Whitaker out there at some point? Palo Alto or no?
Whitaker, I think, was always in Wisconsin. I don't know if he
Wisconsin.
traveled much,
Okay.
but well, he had that big book, The Crucible,
Yeah.
Family Crucible, which
Yeah.
is a tremendous influence. Yeah, well, anyhow, so family therapy was all over California, New York, and then other places where big
Hmm.
shots like Philadelphia was another place, had a lot of family therapy, and of course, wherever Whitaker was in Madison, I think,
Hmm.
Wisconsin.
Maybe it was Madison. That's
But
right.
so anyhow, so I went that route, and it was great. I went to got my degree at a Catholic school, Santa Clara University Jesuit school, where I went undergrad. And I was a little bit struck by how the faith was really in the back seat. They wanted us to be good clinicians, and that made perfect sense.
Hmm.
But I was a little surprised that there wasn't a more overt integration of the faith. The faith was seen more like, well, whatever faith you are, you work it in as best you can, but want you really be professionals. So you can see the dualism already between faith and
Hmm.
faith and the profession. Then one thing led to another, and I ended up being in a program helping Army kids with drug problems, and I was really interested. So my wife and I were assigned to Europe and worked with the U.S. Army there, and lived there, and I worked with the kids, and then I ended up being in a management position. It was interesting how the Army families were all religious. I mean, every one of them, not all Catholic, evangelical usually, sometimes Mormon, oftentimes Catholic. Yet when we were helping them, we really couldn't integrate the faith. It was a government contract. There were a lot of restrictions against that. So two things. One, all the referrals came from chaplains. I go, wow, they really trusted chaplains. And B, we couldn't really bring religion in. But that's the way it goes. It's government contracting. I was new. I didn't know any better or whatever. And I did that for 15 years. And I really learned a lot about leadership and management. We set up programs in Europe and Asia. And but over time, I felt like we weren't giving them everything we could. Religious people, religion is a central part of their life. We can't bring it up. We're trying to solve these severe problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that got to me. And then the other thing is I was traveling traveling too much for a father of four kids. I'm a marriage therapist. I can't be gone so long. So I had a call to conscience. And so then we set up what's called the Alpha Omega Clinic. The Alpha Omega Clinic was an overt integration of mental health, the best of mental health with the best of the Catholic faith. We try to be totally true to the magisterium of the Catholic faith as our bishop interpreted. And then we tried to bring in the best principles of psychology. Perhaps a little naive on that. It was a big marching orders. But then we had here in Northern Virginia, Institute for Psychological Sciences was starting up, and so you had
So
like
did you? I'm
people
sorry to interrupt you. Did you move from California to Virginia to start the Alpha Mega clinics, or did something else bring you to Virginia?
went from California to Germany to help with the Army,
That's it.
and then
Okay.
Germany from here because they brought me here as a manager to kind of work with federal clients. And then over
Gotcha.
time, we
Gotcha.
relocated here. We're happy here in Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we started the Alpha Omega Clinic, and it really took off.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, we weren't really sure if you really play the Catholic thing really overtly, and we played it very overtly. We would see anybody, but we just were clear, but we would see and counsel with the Catholic faith in mind.
Right.
So that's what we did, and it seemed like it worked out really well. I did that for 8 years. It was a great opportunity, and I really loved it. And then I got a call to be the president and CEO of Catholic Charities, but there was a lot of counseling there, a lot of mental health. Actually, I think that's why they gave me the job because I had a lot of experience managing clinicians. So anyhow, the big push for me was that we were practicing with one hand tied behind our back when we couldn't talk about the faith.
Right.
And if I ever had a chance, I said to myself, I would love to integrate that. I got a chance. Somebody asked me if I wanted to do it, and I took it on. So that was probably the big move for me, is to bring everything right to the table that you could prudently to help these families in great crisis. And over time, with my faith, I saw that their faith was a tremendous asset and strength.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we were able to do. And so that's really the story for me. In terms of the temperaments,
Well,
way I
let's
promoted
let's
the
hold off
alphabet.
on the tempers just for a second
Sure,
here.
sure,
So
sure.
no, I mean, I love what you're saying in terms of being able to just bring it all and put it all on the table. And I think
Right.
for me, it was similar in that, I had my conversion in undergraduate, and I really kind of came into my faith when I was at Florida State University as an undergraduate, and then working in the missionary work that we did in rural Alabama. Also had similar experience where I was working with kids that were difficult and just kind of felt like I just was ill-equipped. But it was more
Yeah.
from the other side. It was like I was a youth minister, and I was able to bring the faith, but I didn't have the clinical knowledge
Oh,
yet
I
to
see.
be able
Okay. Yeah.
to offer the support that they needed. And so then when I went to graduate school, I knew I wanted to be a marriage counselor or family therapist is what I wanted to do. And so I found a program in North Carolina that worked for us in University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and I got a tremendous education there. They really trained me very well in terms of being a good clinician, but similarly felt this kind of lack of how to integrate my faith into my work. And so that really has been kind of my career objective, I guess, is trying to still figure that out. And for me, it is, as you said, both kind of putting it all out there, putting it on the table, but there's, which I think also, and this is where I think sometimes the programs are a little, they're averse to talk about faith because they feel that any conversation about faith is going to be an imposition of value set, which isn't the case, because it can be approached from a conversation of cultural competency, which is of course one of the high values in clinical education programs. And so from a place of cultural competency, to understand your client's worldview, to align with your client's worldview, to be able to help your client better understand their worldview. I mean, you enter into that conversation from the perspective of faith, and then it absolutely is something that can be tremendously enriching if the clients themselves are in fact Catholic and are looking for that conversation, or want to feel free that they can bring up those elements of their lives into the counseling room. And from right there, I felt that that's the right avenue with this.
It's really well said. I think you're absolutely right about that integration. I think it's interesting with the cultural competency thing. That's too interesting too. We got a lot of, not a lot, we got some non-Catholic clients would come in because they like the kind of cultural perspective on marriage and divorce. They like that.
Right.
Or so there's different aspects of it, and it's never proselytizing. I mean, Catholic Church is really clear about that. You're either you have to come in freely. The big difference at Alpha Omega, though, was we were being very overt that we're coming at it from a Catholic perspective. Now, we're kind of trying to figure that out ourselves. You know, we didn't want to be onerous. What happens if you give the Catholic perspective and they push back, or can you continue seeing them or not? These things didn't happen as often as you might, as I feared. It really actually happened. Most of the clients that came to us were Catholic, liked the Catholic thing. We also found a priest we were really willing to refer. A lot of priests would never refer to a secular mental health clinician because they kind of had fear where it would go. We're very willing to do it. So I think there was a kind of good appetite here in Northern Virginia, at least, for that integrative model.
Yeah, I think there's an appetite for it everywhere, honestly, because people are looking for that for sure. And so, I think that's been wonderful. The other piece with regards to kind of integration, just to kind of say this also for me, has been kind of like, how do you integrate your theories into your clinical work? And that's always been the challenge, is that how do you take Freud and integrate it with the Catholic anthropology, and I think there's ways to do it. I think that if we look at the like understanding of the person and his relationship to God, and at least kind of understanding of Catholic anthropology, can serve as a foundation that then your theory builds upon. And so I know we're about to get into like temperament and personality stuff, but I really find, and I told this to all my clinicians when I was a director of Catholic counseling services here in the Archdiocese of New Orleans, and I had interns underneath me, and I was training for a couple of years, and I would tell them that, like, whatever theory you choose really kind of is emerging out of, in some ways, your own personality. Like the way that you kind of make sense of the world, make sense of human behavior, you're going to naturally gravitate to those theories. So if you tend to think more cerebrally, then cognitive behavioral is what's going to fit your bill. If you tend to think a little bit more at an emotional level, then sure, you're going to gravitate towards the emotionally focused kind of models that are out there. If you tend to think like, marriage counseling, you want to look at the world from a cultural perspective and a little more systemically, then those are the things that you're going to be operating out of. And so none of those things inherently run contrary to the Catholic faith, because the Catholic faith is big enough to be able to fit all of these, but you have to dialogue with the theory from a Catholic perspective to be able to find its strengths and its limitations, to find where it fits within the Catholic worldview and where it doesn't. But right out of the gates, it doesn't mean that they can't fit together. They can. And the way you do it as a therapist, as a clinician, is ultimately it's going to be at the service of, your clients or your patients that you serve.
It's really well said. It's really true. I found that feature kind of surprising back in the early days of this, because I didn't think there would be like a Catholic model that everybody would have to follow.
Right.
But on the other hand, there were some things that were happening in the culture that clearly made Catholics very uncomfortable. I think the kind of radical materialism, radical behaviorism, which was very popular in the 90s. I don't think I've ever met, but I mean, a lot of people haven't met. I'm not sure I've ever met a, let's say, totally B.F. Skinnerian, dogmatic behaviorist who's practicing from Catholic faith. I'm not sure you could, but I've never met such a person. I have been surprised how many Freudians I meet, though, that are very comfortable with the Catholic thing. I'm not an expert on Freud. I don't pretend to be, you can't avoid them. You have ideas about them. But I'm surprised how many Catholic clinicians are very comfortable being that way, and it seems to work. In terms of that. So no one's crying foul or anything like that. So it's a much wider net of the experts. But I think when Catholicism at its best, it's very united with science. I remember somebody used to say, he used to give talks out here. I think his name was, I can't remember his last name. Patrick was his first name. He was a guy from Princeton. He said, the church never has to fear science. It's never the big enemy. Now, sometimes science hasn't done its work yet. It's got to work itself out. Like right now, I think we're waiting for science to tell us, how do same-sex couples impact children, and we'll find out. We're waiting for science to give us more information. We've seen what science says when they review how does divorce impact kids. A generation ago, everyone said no big deal, relax, but the science doesn't show that. So I think overall, there's been a harmony, at least from the Catholic point of view, between science and the faith. Now, scientism, which does nudge out the faith. People like Barron are on this all the time, at least when I listen to them. That's a different story, because that's really bullying the faith out. And I suppose there are faith-based people that don't care about science. They're just, they get insights from the Holy Spirit, and they're just doing their thing. But I think the integrative model is that they both have great integrity. However, it was interesting when I was starting Alpha Omega. I think I was really trying to integrate the faith into psychology. And I remember I went to lunch with some guy, and he goes, "Why are you doing that?" I go, "Why am I integrating the faith with psychology?" He goes, "Yeah. I mean, that seems backwards to me. Why aren't you doing the other way around?" I go, let me think about that. And I thought about it. I think he's right. If you have to choose, pick. But I never really found that much of a dilemma. I really haven't. I mean, there are probably researchers and research studies that would be against the faith that I would be suspicious of. But usually if I run it by a big shot Catholic psychologist, they can find some research design faults and stuff. So I rather, perhaps naively, assume that there's harmony between science, let's say social sciences at least overall, and the Catholic faith. So I was perhaps naively rather emboldened that you could integrate them, and the clients seemed to get better. And I couldn't get any great arguments that you shouldn't do either one. So, but I think at the end of the day, I mean, if we cried foul, and when I oriented people, we did have a clear idea where the faith was. So like I say to people like, well, no matter what, you can't refer for an abortion. I mean, you can get supervision from me and others, and we'll figure out what to do, but you can't do that. Because we just wanted to be clear about the Catholic rules. We have to take some clients that can't afford to pay because, to honor the poor. So some things like that, some that was kind of made up as we went along, but that was kind of the North Star, was the faith, and that the faith would be healing for people overall. Of course, we also found out a lot of the Catholic clients that came in weren't practicing the faith or really didn't care about it that much, but that's all the normal Catholic world.
Right.
Yeah, it's been exciting to see the integration and that it continues on. It's grown, like you said, it's not just regional, it's all across the country. It seems to be a great appetite for this integration, which is really exciting. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Art, for sharing all of that. It was really beautiful. All right, so let's talk about the temperaments. Okay, let's get into it. So you and your wife Lorraine wrote the book. It came out in 2005, as we said earlier. What inspired you to write it? Why write about the temperaments?
Well, it's interesting. So I'm promoting Alpha Omega, and I have no budget for there's no internet or anything, so you had to just kind of slug around and go to parishes and knock on the door and say, "Do you need any talks or any workshops?" That was a great way to promote the clinician, the family clinician, and the organization. And I had a lot of energy for that. I was younger then, and was happy to go all in the three dioceses of Baltimore, DC, and Arlington. And one time somebody asked me to talk about the temperaments. I go, I studied those in college, but when do you need the talk? Oh, about 3 months. 3 months. All right, so I said, I can learn anything in 3 months. I was older then and younger, and I probably did. So I studied the temperaments quite a bit, gave the talk, and it was unbelievably well received, such that several people came up to me and said, "Can you give it to our parish and our parish and our parish and our parish?" And I said, yes, 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 and yes. And then sometimes they said, I said, "Can I bring my wife? She can talk about the temperaments." Because as I was studying, I realized my wife and I were completely opposite temperaments. I have to say it had a great impact on our marriage. We were so different. I mean, I'm introverted, melancholic, and I come home and I don't want to talk right away. My wife, she's talking before I even knock on the door and wanting to chats. We had some stressors in our marriage, and we actually found the temperaments kind of helpful that way. Long story short, what happened is doing these talks all over the different dioceses, particularly Arlington, we had a file about this thick of temperament stuff, different aspects of it. And then my wife goes, the cleric goes, wow, we should do something with that big fat file. Why don't we look into a book? And we've been reading the Protestant views of temperament, and we, with great respect, we liked them liked them a lot, but we had some differences from them. And also, as far as we could tell, there hadn't been really a Catholic book on temperament since the 30s. So all those things coalesced together. And Sophia was nice enough to publish it. Sophia's got a good brand as kind of a genuine Catholic thing. So we were honored that they took our book. So that's how it happened. It was turning talks into a book. And that's actually, in hindsight, that's why it's a little bit lengthy and a little bit wordy. But
it's great. It's fun.
That's how it happened. And then there was a lot of requests for marriage and a lot of requests for kids. So we wrote the other two that way.
Yep.
That's how it happened.
That's fantastic. I love how these stories are just, they're so practical. That's how it is, I think sometimes people feel that like the creative process is like this divine spark that comes down and it's like, this is what you're supposed to do. And you get this moment of epiphany. Or like, yes, Lord, I'm taking notes, as I'm listening to what you're saying. And that's just not the case. It's like, I think I kind of feel like I should do this. And it's like, hey, there seems to be kind of a need for it. Let's kind of roll with this and see what happens.
It's
and then
really
it's like, oh, well, now that I've done this, what else can I do with what I just did? Oh,
Yeah.
write a book. Let's make it happen. We're already 50% of the way there. Let's just kind of keep rolling and let's make it happen.
Really, that's what captures it. But it's interesting. I wanted to be a philosopher. I went to graduate school in philosophy only to discover I wouldn't have been a very good one. I had this problem called logic that I had trouble with. It's kind of like being a mathematician and you have a trouble with math. So I got out of philosophy, but I think I've always seen myself as kind of want to be a highbrow, really intelligent guy. But as the graduate program pointed out to me, I'm really not that. I'm more of a practical guy. And really, all the breakthroughs I've gotten, the impact I've had has all been on the practical side, and that's just the way it's kind of worked. But I have to say, it's been really rewarding. It's given us an opportunity to talk with thousands of families, and we get mail, and
Incredible.
so it's been a nice kind of I guess apostolate in its own way. Yeah.
Amen. All right. So, what is a temperament?
Well, a temperament, first of all, it's not your whole personality, and that's really important because I think there's some controversy now, particularly from a Catholic point of view.
Yep.
Of not wanting to put anybody in a box and not wanting to say someone's determined. There's not really much of a Catholic appetite for saying you are what you are, deal with it. There's always going to be a notion of freedom, and we're never just the sum of our environment. I mean, I don't think the Catholic view will ever totally accept that. So anyhow, it's not a personality theory. It's like the Myers-Briggs, when they say you're on INFP or ESTJ, they'll say that's your personality, that's the way it is. And as Dr. Jung would say, that's the way it's always going to be. So deal with it and figure it out. Many.
It's not true. My Myers-Briggs changed in the 15 years. Yeah, in between the times I took it. I took it in undergraduate. I took it in graduate school, and I was an ENFP, and then I took it just a couple years ago, and I was I think I was an ESTJ. I like flipped like many of them.
Did you? Wow. For N to S, that's a big shift.
I was kind of like middle on all of them except for the E. The E was consistently off the charts, extroverted.
Yeah.
There was no.
Well, you find that the temperaments. Jung did base a lot of the Myers-Briggs on the temperaments because temperaments go way back to the Greeks. But I think that in theory, usually the temperaments have this a little bit too. You don't really change that much. You change though. Change. You acquire, and the Catholic view, you acquire virtues. That's how you change. But one of the things when you're testing for temperament or Myers-Briggs or whatever is to not do it in the environment. Like Myers-Briggs is a very popular business setting. So when people take the test at work, well, you know how work is. I mean, work likes the outgoing person. They like the real assertive person. So you're kind of still leaning that way. I mean,
it's a little biased to make your answers look the way that you want your employer to look.
I'm in sales. Do I want to come across as a real introverted guy? I don't think so. Or I want to be a CEO. Do I want to come across as an S, or do I want to come across as a big N, a big visionary N? So that has an impact. And I've noticed even when like parish settings and stuff, when people take the temperaments, or every time I run into a bishop who knows anything about temperaments, there's a few that do. They're always choleric, and they might be, but they clearly have you only get the sense that they should be. That's the way they want to be.
Which is
And
not the research supports that the vast majority of priests are actually introverts and more in the
well,
melancholic
that's my
side of things.
experience. That was
So,
my
the
experience.
funny that they'll say that all of them who talk to you are like, yeah, I'm a choleric. Some of them are for sure, but that's not
Yeah,
what the personality research shows with regards to
I
the clergy.
agree. Yeah, if in doubt, if you're a male, you'd rather be choleric than anything else. That's
Oh,
true.
of course. Why wouldn't you be? I
So,
mean, that's kind of
because these are
it's kind of
those
what's given.
those are
So
qualities.
the way you say it in the book, and I love it, and we're kind of talking about this a little bit, is it's a predisposition to react in a certain way, is the clear definition you give. And I guess the way I've kind of thought as I've thought about this, and when I've taught this in classes that I've taught about, anyways, I thought of it like this is what I've heard, is that like the temperament is, and I think you say this in the book, is it's like the nature side. When you talk about the nature versus nurture debate,
Right.
that there's a certain disposition that you are who you are. And so if you were born in Europe or in China or in Africa or in 1850 or in 2555, like it doesn't matter, or on Mars or wherever else we're going to be born, at some point, like if you are, like, there's a part of you that just is what it is, and whatever that is, we would say that's your temperament. But then and I think the word you guys use in the book, which I love, is character. But like your experiences round out, like your experiences obviously will of course play out with your temperament. So you got the nature aspect of it, but then the nurturing aspect, the environmental questions and issues that arise, and that together, this is what kind of forms your personality. What do you think about that?
Well, that's exactly right. It's a tendency to react in situations. And tendency is, I think, the
Tendencies.
best word. It's a little bit vague, but what's trying to cover is you can go either way. So I'll give you an example. When I started being the CEO of Catholic Charities, it was real clear, real fast that I needed to ask a lot of people for a lot of money. And I was actually very afraid of that. Even though I've been in business, the vice president, all that, I just wrote proposals, in personal proposals, and they took them or they didn't. I didn't have to go face to face and say, "Could you please give me $100,000 for this or that?" And I was terrified. I was terrified of it. Now, okay, you can look at my temperament and go, of course, you're, phlegmatic melancholic. I mean, you're introverted, and you don't like to do that, and you're a little bit insecure, and da 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 da. However, it was real clear that I either had to learn that or I had to quit or they'd fire me because this was a necessary part of the job. So it didn't happen overnight, but I did get to the point where I could do that. And I was always a little nervous, never felt totally confident. So that may be a temperament feature. I never feel totally comfortable doing this, but I can learn the skills. I can get the support around me to help me succeed. And that's kind of what I did. And then in most people's lives is a long series of those kind of accommodations. Now, knowing that my temperament, I also realized I needed to work real hard because what I was learning was so against my temperament.
Hmm.
But anyhow, can be done, could be done. So I think that's what you always say when your question is what have I learned over the years? What have I learned over the years about the temperaments is that it doesn't put people in a box. And by
Yeah.
the way, at least the audience we talk to, is it tends to be a Catholic audience. They hate that.
Oh,
They hate it.
well,
So we
yeah,
pick that.
because people who once said, I mean, like people. Well, okay, so hold on. Before we get there, let's run through the four temperaments because we're assuming that everybody who's listening to us knows what we're talking
Okay,
about. So let's not assume that. All right. So let's just kind of run through the four temperaments real quick, and then we'll get into kind of those limitations and
great.
box thinking. So
Yeah. Just
what
preface
are the
these
four?
really,
Why are there four? You
yeah.
know.
They come from the ancient Greeks, and this is a plus minus because it comes from the ancient Greeks, and the church took to the temperaments as a model for helping them understand primarily seminarians, because here come the seminarians, and some of them are kind of quiet. Some of them have a trouble with why does this guy have trouble with charity, and why does this guy is so introverted and never leaves the church, and why is this guy so chatty? And they found that the ancient theory of temperament said it was your blood type. That's been discarded. However, the connection between temperament and the body in a kind of John Paul II kind of phenomenology way still kind of lingers. But why four? Because that's what the
Well, I
Greeks
don't know. I
liked.
just have to say with the blood type, I do often joke with my friends that my blood type actually matches my personality.
There you go.
You know why? Do
Well,
you know what it is?
what is it?
Be positive.
Okay. Be positive. Type A. Okay. Great
Come
one.
on,
Okay.
Ark. I got bad dad jokes all day, but that is
That's
actually true. That is true. My blood type actually is B positive. So maybe the
uh,
ancient Greeks were
uh,
onto something. I
I'm
don't
gonna,
know.
I'm
Just
gonna take
messing.
that as an implicit allowing me to use that joke when I give my talks on temperament because that's a better one than I have. But the people that study temperament today, though, they don't use the same four categories of choleric, melancholic, sanguine, and they use immediate response or delayed response, or immediate response of anxiety or delayed response of anxiety, or easy to forgive, difficult to forgive, or easy to transition, difficult. If you read Jerome Kagan at Harvard, who writes a lot about temperaments, he'll never use the four categories because he probably thinks he'll be laughed out because it's too religious. Again, want to watch out for that. And my wife and I, we decided to use the four categories because there's a long history in the church of using them. But the scientists will just talk about the reaction, but they talk about the tendency to react. And that's really where the action is at for the temperament. So anyhow, so that's where it comes from. The four temperaments, the one most common is choleric. Choleric is your kind of type A personality. They're interesting because the choleric usually have a lot of self-confidence, the most self-confident temperament by far, even though there may not be a connection with reality. They can be confident coaching a team. Like I saw some lady was coaching my son's soccer team, and I talked to her. She goes, "Yeah, I've never played soccer before," and just kind of admired it from afar, but they asked me to be the coach. I'm happy to do it. That's classic choleric.
Hmm.
I've never done it, but I'm sure I'll do a great job when I do it. No big
Why not?
deal. Yeah, and a lot of self-confidence, so skilled. Also, they don't have a fear of conflict. I mean, they don't like it, but they don't like stay up all night, and they don't say, "Well, I won't do that because there's conflict." If they believe in what they're doing and whatever, they tend to be the temperament that sets goals the best. So a lot of motivational speakers are cholerics because they're teaching us how to be choleric, how to set goals and go after them. On the plus side, they have a belief in magnanimity. They want to change things. They don't want to leave a room or an organization or the same way they found it. They want to make it better. They're willing to make tough decisions, fire people, change mission statements, things like that. High tolerance for conflict, great self belief. The downside for the cleric, particularly from a Catholic point of view, is they are more prone to pride. And C.S. Lewis says there's only one ticket to hell. That's called pride. So watch out for pride. So it's clerics have to work hard in spiritual direction, marriages, and other things, and leading their organizations to really listen to each other, to really be empathic. I think they're right all the time. I guess you can think that, but you want to be open to other influence, which helps in marriage, helps in businesses. Those are hard qualities for the cleric because of their tendency to take charge and just do it my way or the highway. That's their temperament, and that's their temptation. But they can change because it's not a locked personality. It's just their temperament.
Right.
Next one maybe might start with would be the opposite, the phlegmatic. I'm a phlegmatic. Cleric gets in the room, wants to change things or make them better or put their stamp on it. Phlegmatic walks in the room, just wants to fit in. I don't want to cause too much attention to myself. I'm just here, happy to be part of the team. If they're a leader, I've been in a lot of leadership positions. It's more kind of player's coach, so to speak, of what do people think? What do they want? What's the mission statement? If I have to make a hard call, I'll appeal to a mission statement, not to my own ego or something. And I think they blend in their biggest challenge. So their biggest asset is peaceful. And who doesn't want peaceful, cooperative, team player? But the biggest challenge for the phlegmatic is conflict. They are actually very intimidated by conflict. As far as I can tell, you're a therapist. Life is just full of conflict. This comes up all the time. Therapy sessions, when someone says, "I'm afraid of conflict," I go, "Well, we got to work on that." Like, what?
Yeah.
Now? I mean, it's like we've already got a conflict. I'm telling you, it's the biggest thing. And it's
Start
interesting.
yelling at your clients.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see the phlegmatic learn to embrace conflict. Learn to embrace conflict. And one of the great things that's happened in the last 15 or 20 years is the concept of reframing, turn from the notion of fear-based running away into growth-based reframing. So it comes up right away with the phlegmatic. We got to figure out how to have you really embrace and get excited about the growth opportunities with conflict. They don't like to make controversial decisions because people like it. And I remember my son, because he's phlegmatic, he brought home the high school newspaper. All my other kids were not phlegmatic, so they never brought it home. Bring this to your parents. My other kids just tossed it away. But the phlegmatic brought it home and gave it to us. My wife and I were reading it. Well, look, they have student body president elections in 2 weeks. Why don't we sit down and talk about it? So he sat down because he's phlegmatic, and we talked about it. And it was a 16 or 17-year-old teenager. And I go, well, long story short, we said, why don't you run? He ran and he won. Wow. Became a student body president. Boom, like that. Well, then what happened then? Endless conflict. You said you were going to have the dance at the Hilton, but it's back at the Knights Hall. This is stink. So you said you're going to do this, you're going to do that. You said we're going to. So he really grew up as a young phlegmatic man, realizing that he could overcome conflict and overcame his fear of it. So it was great. So that's the issue, the challenge really for the phlegmatic. The Next one maybe would be sanguine. Sanguines are the most extroverted, using that Myers-Briggs term, which I think really fits. They're people. They love talking to people. Remember, I was talking to a bishop. I said, "What's the hardest thing about being a bishop?" He goes, "You got to be on all the time, raise your eyebrows, and like talking to people." And I go, "Are you okay with it?" He goes, "I love it, but a lot of my fellow bishops are introverted, like many priests are. That's what burns them out, is the constant openness to people. But I love it." And he was a sanguine priest, sanguine bishop, and he just loved it. People are energizing, love to talk to him, love to see him. Because he was some certain politicians, they just get more and more energetic as they meet people and talk to people. Maybe perhaps like politicians, though, sanguines can sometimes be overly impressed with the latest thing they hear, the latest idea, the latest music, the latest this, that. They might count the number of friends they have more than the quality of friends they have. They hit on the challenge for the great asset for the sanguine is they probably are good at the most important thing, which is relating to people. Great gift from God. The biggest challenge is that they tend to be less disciplined, and they are also, if something's really hard and difficult, would have a harder time usually kind of hanging in there. So that's the help they need if
Yeah.
you're a parent or
This sort
spouse.
of stick to itness is
Yeah,
what
yeah,
sanguines really challenge. It's the challenge for sanguines
really,
because
yeah,
it's
it's
like
great.
shiny, ooh, shiny, ooh, shiny. Let's just, let's
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
keep
Or
moving.
my wife puts it, it's just like butterfly. Oh, that flower's pretty. Oh, that flower's better than that. And that's kind of the way the world is. Or you join clubs, but you don't go to the meetings. So
Mhm.
it's kind of doing the brass tacks, the hard work, the unglorified things, the things that tend to be more vanity oriented, which from the spiritual point of view can be a red flag. Got to watch out for that. On the other hand, they're really great with people. And, a lot of us things, I wish there were more sanguine church leaders that, and when you see them, like someone like Cardinal Dolan, you see them, this big personalities, it's very powerful. And then the final one would be melancholic. Melancholic's the most introverted, the most maybe quiet, the most suspicious of new things, new ideas, where choleric and sanguine are pretty good with new ideas. Let it be almost totally, all decisions are almost totally quality and almost rarely quantity. It's very right hemisphere, but very little left hemisphere in that regard. On the other hand, they get wrapped up in details. Whenever you see somebody reading you go to shop for cereal and you see somebody reading the side of the cereal box, that's probably a melancholic. And they read the policies and procedures. They write them and they read them, and probably nobody else reads them.
So
They
actually, I
like,
have a funny story I want to share with you about that. I
sure,
was
yeah,
when I was at Notre Dame Seminary before I took this job here at Willwoods. I was on the committee, one of the many committees that we had for revisioning kind of the student handbook, and we were kind of going through kind of certain. We the whole faculty was broken up into small subgroups that had like certain sections of the
yeah.
handbook that we were supposed to look. And so in my subgroup, it was me and five other melancholics. and,
Uh-oh.
I remember it was
Good
my
luck.
first real exposure of like working with a melancholic, and not just one of them, but five of them. And man, I mean, it was line by line, sentence by sentence, dot
Yeah.
by dot, bit by bit, arguing the syntax, the grammar. And so they were in the weeds, kind of making sure that everything sounded right. And every once in a while I'd be like, let me just raise my hand. Hey, can we just breathe and like like take a high level approach to what, like, are we even answering? We're so busy kind of making sure the grammar and the syntax is right. Are we even answering the question that we're charged to answer? Like, does this paragraph at a high level even answer the question that's supposed to answer before we dive into the grammar and making sure that the grammar is correct? And I was like, oh man, this is going to
That's a
be a
great,
challenge for me.
that is a perfect example. Actually, another way to look at that from the new neuroscience studies is it's totally left brain dominated, left
Hmm.
hemisphere dominated, and you can't get the big picture. I think when maybe, and that kind of gets to the strength weakness of the melancholic, when they get the big picture, then all their attention to detail makes perfect sense. And they're the kind of people that keep you out of trouble, and they're going to make sure the taxes are done right and that the policies are correct and we're following the rules.
Yep.
If, however, they don't have that right, and again, ideally in the Catholic context, you got the big picture. We're trying to serve Christ here. We're trying to get people to love each other better. If you get that, and then you go into the left hemisphere with the details of the melancholic, it can fit perfectly. If, however, you don't have that big picture thing and just kind of going kind of from a sensate point of view, trying to build up, well, good luck. So you hit the strength weakness, I think, of the melancholics. Great attention to detail, but the biggest decisions usually have to go right hemisphere and have to be big picture. What's the context? How do we make sense of this? We don't have 7 hours to work on this paragraph, so let's be
We
fun.
don't.
And
You
so
ever watch Monty Python and Search for the Holy Grail?
yeah, yeah,
Can I
not for a
confess
while.
this on the podcast? Uh, there's that one scene where like they're like going, there are many tangents, but there's one where like they're just like, get on with it, you know, and like God just like gets on with it. It's like that's
Yeah,
like I kept felt feeling. I was like, gets on with it. Let's keep rolling. But you're absolutely right in the sense that, I mean, the beauty of this is you're talking about the four temperaments here that clearly, and you did a wonderful job defining for us the strengths and the limitations of each, and that's by design. I mean, like no one person is the perfect harmony of all of these because the reality is that we are all designed to have strengths and limitations. And so our limitations are meant to be part of the process because our limitations remind us that we are not an end to and of ourselves. Our limitations remind us that we need other people, we need community. Ultimately, we need God to be able to make up for that which we are lacking. And so, organizationally, we should see when all four of these temperaments are operating that they all have their own place and their own
right.
lane and their own opportunities to bring about great good to whatever is happening within this organization. And so just like with the subcommittee that I was in, I mean, I was grateful to be the only choleric sanguine, you know, in the committee to try, but they were a blessing to me also because my impatience wasn't always virtuous. My
Yeah,
patience was just that. My patience rarely is virtuous. Let me say that. But it was
no,
it was just my need to kind of keep moving on. And so like you see this when you work in groups, and this is what I love about kind of leadership studies and stuff, and being able to kind of get the right people on the right bus and the right chair and the right bus, and giving people the opportunities to shine. Because when you do that, then the system as a whole is better off for it.
yeah. I mean, I think Paul kind of covered this when he talked about the different parts of the mystical body of Christ. You know, there's teachers, there's apostles,
Mhm.
and I think that that's all part of the church's view, is that nobody has all the skills. And there's good reason for that too. I mean, because of pride, pride would probably take over if I had all the
Right.
skills. The other hand, it is interesting when you meet the saints. Like whenever you want to, people often ask us, "Well, what do you think of the temperament of this saint or that saint?" It's really hard to tell downstream. They get so holistic, and their decisions are made on prudence, not on temperament. A temperament decision would be not getting the big picture in this group you're in, and we're just going to kind of keep going after this paragraph for 6, 7 hours, and then but the overall goal won't be met. So it's good they had you as the leader on that,
No, I
probably.
wasn't the leader. I was just
Well,
vocal. I was just on the committee. I
gotta
was
move
like,
on. Well, you
move
gotta move
on.
on. You gotta move on.
Gotta move
Uh,
on.
and that balance, I think, that prudential balance between uh, my temperament pushes me this way. The situation here pushes me that way. Like I mean, what happens almost all phlegmatic. You got to take a lead in the family. You got a family, and you got 3 or 4 kids or 5 kids, or even one kid. You got to lead them, and then you want to move up so you can afford the family. So you have to get in maybe some more leadership positions. Very hard for a phlegmatic to do that. Very, very hard. Or for the cleric to start listening to people when they really, in their heart, believe that they have the best ideas and best impressions. If they don't do that, if they don't make that change and growth, they'll be less effective, not only leaders, but people. You know, so it's all set for admiring the qualities you have, respecting other people's qualities, and realizing you have to continue to get virtues to grow. It's a kind of comes back down to virtue. Virtue is how you grow.
Virtue's how you
Um,
grow. And that's the point that you were kind of hinting earlier when you said that some of the misinterpretation of this type of language or this understanding of the temperaments is that you kind of fall into a category and then you stay in that category. And like people
right.
do with the Myers-Briggs similarly, even though Myers-Briggs is not a temperament per se, but similar people will just
Very
throw
similar.
these
Yeah.
throw these letters out and they're like, well, this is just what I am. I'm just choleric, I'm just an angry person. It's who I am. It's like it's not who you are, like that's no excuse for you not to grow in meekness or learning how to bite your tongue and learning how to be a little more charitable and empathetic. Like yes, it's your tendency, but don't be lazy, like you still, or like the sanguine similar, it's like, well, it's just who I am. I'm an ideas guy, and
Yeah.
I'm just gonna
Yeah.
keep rolling. Well, like, okay, sure, but you're also not having the responsibility of following through with what you say you're doing, and other people are kind of having to deal with your erraticness of a schedule and inability to show up to the meeting on time. Like that has consequences for others. And so you can't just claim to have one of these temperaments and be like, well, that's just it, that's who I am, and everybody else has to deal with it. Like that just doesn't that's not at all what we're saying.
That's right. That's not good psychology. It's not good. Certainly not good Catholic spirituality. Catholic spirituality is kind of hyper growth oriented.
Hmm.
All the way through. And Yeah, so that's a temptation. Well, actually, it's a temptation of all of us to kind of put ourselves in a box. I'm a morning person. I'm a night person.
Yeah, right.
I'm a wallflower. I'm outgoing. I can't get this done. Can't get that done. I think we all fall into that. It's probably original sin that we kind of box ourselves in or get boxed in. And you were asking me too if I wrote the book today or rewrote it from scratch today, would some things be different? I think a couple of things. One is the neuroscience that really reinforces what you just said, that our brains are very malleable. We can change. We can change our approach to things. Not just happen overnight. It's organic growth. But the person who's distant can become a person who's more intimate. The person who's doesn't like to serve people can learn to serve people. These things can happen, and the church is always going to be in favor of that model. It's very Christ-centered. I mean, Christ just goes around asking for conversions all the time, wanting people to change. So ideally, the church is a structure and institution that is very growth and freedom oriented.
Hmm.
That's always a primacy and very impatient. I think talking to priests in the confessional, they're impatient when someone says, "No, I just got this sin. I just can't overcome it." They may acknowledge and with great empathy say, "I see the struggle in it," but they're rarely going to wave the white flag and say, "Yeah, just accommodate to it." So ideally, psychology is providing extra help to the spiritual side of life, of giving ideas, approaches to things, the best science on change and growth, so that we don't get stuck in a box.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah,
it's
because it doesn't, it's not helpful. And it's not, like you said, it's not good science, it's not good psychology, it's not good spirituality because,
yeah,
we're never stagnant, or we're never supposed to be stagnant in the spiritual life. I love the way you just said that in terms of Catholicism actually is like a hyper self-growth. How did you say it? Like really focused on and so on
yeah. I think it's growth all the time. I
yeah,
mean, it's hard to
because
think of a gospel passage where Christ goes, "Yeah, that's cool. That's don't worry about it." I mean,
well,
he
there
says,
is none. I mean, like even in Revelation, when he talks about the lukewarm or the people that he's going to spit out of his mouth, I mean, there's kind of we're kind of saying the same thing where the man who buries the talents, is the one
"Yeah,
who, rather than the
right,
ones who are investing it. I mean, here we're seeing this kind of playing out in Scripture, which is that like God's like, keep going, man. Like you gotta, you gotta keep moving forward. You gotta keep putting one step in front of the other, and trying to work on yourself, and that's something that is going to take a lifetime and sometimes even beyond that,
right,
because like while there is always going to be this tendency towards one way, it's kind of like an alignment in a car. The car's just always
right,
going to pull in one direction. Like we still have to kind of do the corrective work to make sure that we're staying on the road. And so if the listener here knows that they are more of a melancholic, then hey, that's fine. Then make sure that you are surrounding yourself with people who have a different perspective, um, but honoring yourself. So if you are more introverted, then the purpose of knowing that is then like, well, what do I need to do to recharge? What I need to do? What's leisure going to look like for me? How do
right.
I, how do I genuinely get my cup filled again? What are the situations? And this is, of course, even we're talking about like something like strength finders or something, which isn't necessarily temperaments, but
Mhm.
there's
Yeah,
a lot of modalities out here that
yeah,
you know your strengths, so that you put yourself in a position. The theory, of course, is that you put yourself in a work environment where your strengths are accentuated to the best of their abilities. So
right.
you're not always operating out of your weakness, but you can't always ignore your weakness either. And this is the challenge with that. It's like you can't ignore your weakness and pretend it's not there. You got to deal with it, but still put yourself in a situation where your strength is going to be most highly accentuated.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I think there is a temptation in the culture now in business. Strength finders is kind of maybe a good example. And I have great respect for strength finders, but it's pretty much just pay attention to the strengths of your employees and don't worry so much. And it's almost like it doesn't have, it's kind of a despair that you really can't change people or people can't really grow under your watch. So just really get the right people with the right strengths and put them on the right side of the bus. So the driver drives the bus and that's it and that kind of. But the church is never going to be totally that way. First of all, we're not that utilitarian oriented. We're not that results oriented either. We're much more process oriented. You kind of use a clinical term of wanting to encourage growth at all times. All times. Now, the way the church stays out of threat mode, because you say to somebody, grow, 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 and you're going to go, oh my God, this is stressful. What the hell kind of boss I got now? I got to do this and that and the other. Obviously, in the church, you would have to be front loaded with mercy. And now that we have the grace of God, that's our optimism and our hope. It's not like I can be super cleric man or woman. It's he'll grow within me. He'll take me where he wants me to go. He will put me in situations for growth, but he'll give me the support totally. And that's where I think psychology and the spiritual side can really be an ally of not putting people in threat mode, change or else, you know. Like we see that so much in our marriage therapy. Change or else. I call the lawyers, and you're trying to go, well, it's just not the best motivator. Let's just try to resurrect love here. That's the other thing too. I think psychology, I think, is uniquely disqualified for really giving a great definition of love. I mean, it's going to be a little bit on the craving side, and whereas I think the faith and certainly poetry and the beauty of life can give. So we can get the goal. Let's say the Christian goal is to be loving at all costs, and that actually is the best way to go. I think that that's a beautiful goal, and I think psychology can be a ally, a collaborator on strategies and ideas for growth to be something other than just threat mode and things like that, but a real kind of flowering and enhancement. So it's interesting to see if that integration can occur in such a way that you can look at the whole person. It's kind of get what I started off as. I always was frustrated by the one hand tied behind my back. So now we get both hands free here. How do we really bring the best to bear to people? That takes a lot of wisdom and experience. But you
Yeah,
see
because then
clients.
you're talking about like the healing of your emotions is at the service of love. The healing of your cognitions is at the service of love. The understanding of your strengths is at the service of love. The understanding of your
Yeah,
temperament and your personality is at the service of love,
right.
which
That's
is
right.
the the best version of it was. I mean, it's the right, the will and the good of the other, for the sake of the other's own good. But
Right.
it is that sense of like, how do you make the best gift of yourself? And in understanding all of your personality traits and quirks and temperaments and gifts, at the end of the day, it's not understanding that. And I think this is kind of when the temptation is, well, I'm just this, is that you've made that almost an idol to and of itself. You've made it a finality to and of itself, rather than
Right.
saying that this is ultimately at the service of something greater. And that something greater, of course, is God and love itself.
Well said. That's true.
So I have to say though that like, so like it's beautiful to think about this in terms of a system, and then thinking about like heaven as being kind of like all of us and our perfect personalities interacting with one another. But there are some personality types that really rub me the wrong way, and I know that's one of my limitations. And so, man, that's going to be a hard place in heaven. People who trigger me, and
Yeah.
and I'm gonna be like, all right, Lord, like I don't know how you're going to work that one out in heaven,
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to give it all to you.
Maybe that's a good play back into purgatory for those
Yeah,
past.
probably
I
will.
mean, Teresa of Avila said that the growth never stops because if you're with Christ, with God, then you're going to be growing, and so it never stops. So it's an eternal part of our lives. So it's not like we just. I'm not, and again, this might be a little bit on the margins. I'm not sure all saints would agree with this, but she says that your growth never stops. There's no
Well, I mean, to
sense.
some degree, it would make sense. Again, I'm not a philosopher, so I may lack the language here. But if God Himself is reality or eternity or whatever, then there's no period at the end of that sentence,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
so
some rewarding, like St. Jerome apparently had a great temper. He was a very difficult guy to get along with, and he really never got a whole lot better on that. I remember the homily, we just had the feast day of St. Jerome maybe a couple of weeks ago, and the priest giving the homily goes, he's a really important saint for us because he never got it totally together in an area, charity, which usually you got to check that box to become a saint. But they said, but he struggled with it so much. And he did have his little victories every once in a while, and also if he hadn't had that real tough mind, he probably couldn't have thrown the Bible together. So at the end of the day, one of the popes gave him the crown, and I don't think anyone's disagreed with it, but he was rough around the edges and in a
mhm.
very critical area. And it's interesting that the church and its goodness and generosity would identify him and see him as a
That should give us
saint.
hope. I mean,
He
that
was,
should absolutely give us hope. Recognizing that, like, hey, if he can get there, then hopefully I can too.
that's right. Yeah,
So
got it. Yeah.
you I know you've talked about this in the book and in other contexts in terms of saints who had certain temperaments, and we've been talking about this even through today. But what about Christ? What temperament does
Yeah.
Jesus
Our,
manifest?
our, our view, and it's one of the most frequently asked questions, which
Sure.
shows that we speak to a lot of Catholic audiences. Our view of Christ is that he didn't make decisions based on his temperament. He makes decisions based on what was prudent. In other words, he didn't have to filter through his weakness because he'd had no sin. Sin does kind of turn the temperaments on edge. So, for example,
Yeah, but
he
there's an
walked.
element of temperament though that I imagine temperament isn't just the product of the fall. I mean, like in terms of
No, I
the
don't think it is. That's right. I don't think it is either.
I
I
don't
think
think so. I think that there's the personality and the uniqueness of the person and the strengths and limitations of the person would have existed even
yeah,
had we not
it'd be
succumbed to
hard to
sin.
identify the temperament of Mary or Christ. because they never sinned. So,
They
but
never
right,
said.
right, good point. I'm not identifying the weaknesses of temperament as sinful or immoral, even
Right.
immoral. But with Christ, I think you get the sense of here's the situation. What's the best response? And then he just gives that. So he might say on one day, and this is a challenge for us to figure this out, that you should turn the other cheek. Okay, so if somebody gives me trouble or whatever, I'm supposed to turn the other cheek and let them whack me. Is that the rule? And then, whatever time he wakes up one morning and goes to the apostles, okay, we're going to go to the temple today. I'm going to turn over some tables. I'm going to turn over some tables. You are? Yeah. What do you do with that rope? I'm going to start beating people with this rope. And we're going to say, are you with me or not? Yeah, I guess so. So what's that about? Was he in a bad mood that day? Was he in a kind mood the other day when he said turn the thing? And probably whatever, I guess in his case, whatever God the Father wanted him to do, he was radically, I guess that's true of the Garden of Gethsemane. He was radically available to do it. He might lobby for a position, but at the end of the day, whatever the Father wants him to do, that radical obedience, indifferent to his temperament, just whatever it takes to get it done. I mean, it's probably where we're all shooting for, is to be whole men and whole women
Right.
that can see the situation. My kid has this problem. My boss has this problem. I got this problem. How can I bring it to bear to help it grow? And if I'm a shy guy, I'm going to be sweating when I have to go and make a demonstrative thing. If I'm a real hard driver, I'm going to have to really be hard for me to sit to my 15-year-old addicted son and hear him out about why his life is so screwed up, and I just want to lecture him to death. These dying to ourself to do what God wants. I think our temperaments will show where that's easier or harder. So we always kind of pass on Christ, that he's, I don't know, beyond the temperament. I mean, so maybe we're saying temperaments are kind of unique to people that are
Well, I think
not,
sometimes people ask because they want
not,
they want to know if they have Christ's temperament, which then can make them holier. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. It's to
yeah, I
say.
mean, I guess a Christ temperament, you would let him slap you in the face when that was the best response, and then you would knock over every table in the hallway of of your church and see what happens. I don't know. It's
No, but I appreciate what you're saying, which is that what we see in Christ is obviously the perfect decision maker. So this in the most prudent man, the wisest man, and the most
yeah,
integrated man at every level, whether it's obviously the hypostatic union of the total divine and the total human, but that also means the total human within itself, that there is perfect harmony and integration of who he is. Um, and so, does it really matter? Not necessarily, because you see him making the perfect decisions always. And so if the situation calls for turning the other cheek, that's the right
right.
decision. If the situation calls for turning over the tables, then that's the right decision. If the decision is to, walk through the crowds and make yourself unavailable and not being able to touch, then great. If the decision is now's the time to turn myself over, then that's the decision. And so this perfect harmony, of course, with the will of God is what we see with Christ. That maybe because of that perfection, we can't see very clearly kind of where the personalities kind of emerge, I guess, or the personality differences. If it's just the white light, obviously you can't see the spectrum, because it's just how
Yeah.
it is.
And he was only in public ministry, I guess, 3 years, but there's stories of him being radically extroverted. Why doesn't he talk to Herod? I mean, he talks to Pilate, and then why does he just shut his mouth to Herod? Or was he like tired, or he didn't like Herod? I mean, I don't know. Of course, all these responses cause us to think, why did he not talk to Herod, or why did he talk to Pilate, or that? So his behavior causes us to search ourselves and try to figure out what's the best way to behave. But I guess the common denominator with Christ is, it might be even most exemplified at the end there, where they offer him something to drink on the cross, and he goes, no. He must have been unbelievably thirsty.
Right.
But so what's that no mean? I'm just doing it the way my Father wants me to do it, even though no comfort for me. Thank you very much. So it's radical, but that's the common denominator, I guess. It's just radically obedient to the Father. Now, what kind of a Father is this? All this causes us to really try to understand our faith and our God better and ourselves. But I know, so I don't know if we're not dodging the question, but we think he's a little hard to
I don't
put
know if
in a
there's an answer. I think
hard to
that's
put in a
kind of what you're
box.
saying. Yeah.
Temperament.
It is. But
Mary's a
Christian,
different story. It never comes up, but I mean, she was also sinless.
right,
Now being a woman and all this, and she had a hard road. Oh my God! I
right.
mean, whoever called that shot, Simeon, I guess, 7 swords,
Oh
and
yeah, it's
well,
awful.
this is what you get for being the mother of God.
Thank you
So
very
that
much.
would be another thing, but that never comes up. Never comes up.
So, you said this a little bit earlier, but is there anything else that you would add to the book now if you wrote it, or what else do you feel? You said you started dabbling a little bit in neurology, so if there's more you want to say there,
Yeah,
is there some other stuff that you want to add?
yeah, I would definitely talk about. I don't think mentioned the word reframing. If I wrote the book today and I talk about the book today as I've done here, I mentioned reframing a lot. That's a great skill that helps with temperament growth. Mindfulness, I would also talk more about that. I would integrate that with prayer, particularly in this radical distracted era we're in now. Mindfulness becomes much more important. It was important in 2005, but it's like hyper important
Hmm.
now. I think one thing too I would talk more about is trauma. One of the things that comes up when we talk about temperament is what is the effect of trauma. We assume, and we were clear about this in our later books, we're assuming that there's not a traumatic event that can allow your natural temperaments to flourish. Now, it turns out, to be quite honest, I think looking back on what we're doing, that might be assuming almost too much because trauma is so common and so frequent now. So I would probably articulate that more, the role that trauma play. I mean, the way that role that trauma plays in making it difficult for people to identify their strengths and live their strengths is one of its more serious
Right.
casualties.
Yeah.
You
Profound shame.
know,
Profound shame.
true, yeah. You meet people who are
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
just might talk to someone recently. She's a teacher. She's sacrificing. She's got a class of, I think, junior high kids. Oh my God, teaching Catholic stuff to junior high. Are you kidding me? And doing it well. And then she's in counseling and she's telling, oh, I'm a horrible person. I don't have anything to contribute. I don't have anything to add. And of course, you go searching for the wound and you find it, and it
Hmm.
distorts the self-image so much that these strengths are just languished or not, or only can serve others, or not a source of her strength. And so many people have this. So I think we would probably try to pay more attention to that aspect of it as just because in 15 years that, then also just the kind of general culture now, which is much more leaning into problems than reducing the stress of our problem. That is the best way to overcome the stress of your problems is lean in, go after it. Now that can sound choleric, hyper choleric, or maybe a little melancholic too. Just deal with your
Yeah.
problem.
Just kind of get it done. Yep.
So I don't know exactly what we would have done about it, but at least if we write in the book today, those are things that would have to at least be thought through a little bit more. I think in a lot of ways there's bigger problems today, but also I think commensurate there's more tools today. A lot of the
Right.
neuroscience stuff is that our brain isn't quite as locked in as it could, that it can be more malleable than we thought. I think that's wonderful as well. But
But I think even with that, of course, there's still going to be that natural disposition, that you, of course, can have a rewiring, of course, all the Dan Siegel mindsight stuff is excellent, in regards to interpersonal neurobiology. I'm a big believer in all of that. Um, and, and at the same time, yeah, you're always going to be, if you're right-handed, you're going to be right-hand dominant. I mean, you can be proficient and learn how to use your left hand, and I have just actually specifically just to be able to have greater neurological pathways, for greater
yeah,
brain health. So I brush my teeth with my left hand. I try to eat with my left hand. I try to shoot hoops with the left hand, and just try to, get stronger. So I'm developing actually greater, kind of
that's
neurological
great.
connections in through my whole body. But I'm still going to eat with my right hand. My preference is still always going to be that. And so I think it's always finding that balance, that we're not, I think that runs the risk, sometimes with the neurological stuff is it can run the risk of being like, well, if you just do it enough, you can completely rewire and it's a blank slate. Well, we're not just blank slates, but there is a lot of work we can do. And we do know that. We absolutely know that. All the addiction research supports that. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
we're really not blank slates, so that's really important. I guess the temperament is a model of that we're not blank slates. That's really well said. I think I like the way you put that. Yeah, I mean, everything can be taken a little bit too far, that's for
yep.
sure.
Yep.
But I think a lot of this stuff raises some hope of making changes in areas that were, I mean, 70 or 80 years ago, alcoholism was a hopeless thing. Now it's a
Right.
difficult thing, but there's a path.
Right.
And I think a lot now anxiety is just everybody walks in the room before the clients do, and people in great fear, great fear.
A lot of
And
anxiety.
so some of this neuroscience stuff is helpful with that, and but not a placebo. I think you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, the church is usually pretty well balanced between these things. The church doesn't ask you to be perfect. It just asks you to acknowledge that God is perfect and to try to integrate His grace in your life and try to be a person that's closer to Him than you can ever achieve being Him. So it's a bit of a nuanced and difficult thing, but it's still probably the best thing, best model going for healthy growth. And
The church's model, is that what you're saying?
yeah,
It's the best
yeah,
model? I think
on
so.
a natural level, it's got.
Well, there's something to be said about just, again, the acknowledgement that we're loved at a profound fundamental way, and that the whole orientation of our life is to the whole sum of our life is to be able to achieve, to be able to love in that same way. And so it's difficult to believe that at times we feel like we're alone, or that we feel that we have to have it all together, or pressure that's placed on us that somehow our, you said earlier, kind of falling into strict utilitarianism that has run rampant in our society, strict materialism that's run rampant in our society. Um, that these things at the end of the day aren't the full definers of who we are as people, um, which is still the greatest gift that Christianity gives to the world.
I think you're right. The mercy of God, which comes up all the time in Mass, if you look for it, is probably still the biggest game changer. And that we're children of God.
Hmm.
That would be another area to explore more. So, if you're in the family of God, the mystical body of Christ, how is that like being in a normal family, and how is it better or worse than being in a normal family? Because you see so much family woundedness, it's really tempting to say, well, get over to join this club, the mystical body of Christ. And I don't say that facetiously. That's a lot of what I think happens. See everybody's your brothers and sisters in Christ and all that. And so let's just hit the refresh button and see how it goes. I think there's some of that is going on. I think a lot of the writings of the church lend to that. Certainly St. Paul, who seems to be completely different, whether he's in prison or he's about to have his head handed to him, or somebody else just abandoned him or whatever. And he just continues to talk about this joy. So what the heck is that? So he's obviously going into a deeper area of radical love of Christ that overcomes all this stuff. So I think the whole notion of how we are a body, how we are a church, how we are a family. I know one of the things I learned at Catholic Charity, I thought that running Catholic Charities was like running a business, but I was really wrong. I had to really change that right away. It was more like a family. So I was there 10 years. I didn't get that until my third or fourth year. Thank God I got it. I
Amen.
wish I would have got it sooner. But because I was trying to fit a wrong model on it. Same way when I started Alpha Omega, I was thinking you have to integrate the faith with psychology. I had to flip that. Then it started to work. Then I had to see, well, Catholic Church is never good. Nothing wrong being a business, but that's not what it is. It's got business features, like just like a family-owned business, but it's a family. It's a family. And so once I got that, it just made the whole job just clearer, and everything kind of, not everything fit in place, but then I had a deal I could march towards. I think was pretty effective. And then we all need that for our own life. I think you've hit on the main one for our own life. Is I want to be a man or woman of love. I want to feel like I am loved, and I want to love. And that's not maybe not the easiest route, which should be the most rewarding and probably healthiest. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great.
But I admire what you're saying in terms of just allowing yourself to, this is the freedom, as we've been saying all the time, in terms of like, we don't have to have ourselves figured out. We can let go of this perfectionism. The reality is, even if we were perfect, we would still be growing, kind of leaving with this openness that's always going to be there, which is just a better way of being able to approach the challenges that we face, and really kind of cutting ourselves some slack. A lot of research now supporting self-compassion and empathy. This is the work of Brene Brown and Kristen Neff that's just been obviously
Mhm.
just really, really popular for the right reasons, because shaming ourselves, condemning ourselves is not, we can consistently see is not a good recipe for growth. So you said just a few minutes ago, like your willingness to step into positions that you felt God was calling you to, even though you weren't exactly quite maybe perfect or ready for that, but being able to learn and say, okay, like, how do I adapt? How do I re-envision this? How do I see this in the right, in the right context? And then being able to say, okay, great. And then doing that. So allowing the development of life to kind of unfold naturally, is probably your phlegmaticness. That's a lesson for all of us cholerics to 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 embrace.
I have been mad at this. Yeah, I don't say no to your this request, and it works out. Right, right. Well, Christ does like to test. I mean, I
He
know
does like
people.
to test us. There's no
You don't
doubt about that.
like teachers that give pop quizzes, but he talks about it all the time. The stranger in the night. So he's kind of fond of that model. We aren't. But well,
Praise the
uh,
Lord. Well,
yeah.
Art, well, I know we're kind of running a little long here, but I do have just one final question before we kind of get into our conclusion. Like, in marriage, in family life, relationships, what's kind of some quick advice for people who are dating or married to somebody who is of a different temperament? How do you massage that? How do you navigate that?
It's very common. It's more common that people marry a different temperament than their own. I think we are actually attracted to different things. I think there has to be radical respect for the person and the key elements of the person, even if they're different from you. Um, I mentioned like my wife, she likes someone who came home and talked right away and all that. And I had to make some changes in myself, like to come home and ready to talk. But her acceptance of that of me actually made me more willing to talk because I felt so loved and respected by her. And then the other hand, I'm just so grateful to have a wife that really want to ask about my day and appreciate it. So we both kind of met at halfway. So I think you have to have respect for the qualities, the main qualities of your spouse, a lot of respect, even if you don't agree with them totally, even if you don't agree. And they need to be fine-tuned. If you're married 50 years, everything gets fine-tuned a lot. So I think radical respect for each other is other things. I think couples don't need to agree on 25 things. There's just 3 or 4 or 5 things you need to agree on. I love watching NBA basketball. My wife has never sat down next to me and watched more than 30 seconds of it, and that's fine. And she has all these tons of cooking books, and I will probably never look at them. That's fine. But how we raise the kids, what is our faith like, what are our values, what's our North Star, we have to talk about that and get close to it, or at least radically respectful and genuinely generous without that. So I think find the things that are the most important, come to a constant dialogue and discussion about them. They might change over the years, but they tend not to. I think leading with radical respect leads to much more love. And it's got to be overt respect too. Not like, well, I love you, babe. But no, you got to, so I think being overtly respectful and generous, and also not taking everything as a plot. That's one thing I like about the temperaments. Sometimes people in their marriages are going sour. They go, oh, he's plotting against me. He's sitting up all night thinking how to make me miserable. Actually, even in the worst marriage cases, some of the worst, they do that. It's very rare. We don't really spend the time doing that. So temperaments are at least a pause, not to go to the negative sentiment override, and maybe to see that there might be something healthier and better. And the third is just always on this Christ's mercy, God's mercy. He only seems to get upset when we don't ask. When you don't ask and knock on the door and right. Make that a part of your life. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Art, I was enjoying the interview until then you said you're an NBA fan, and now you just went from here to like way up here, because I'm a huge NBA fan and have been my whole life. And so there it is. Like, you just got so much cooler in my eyes. So had nothing to do with your answer. I just fixated on the fact that you like NBA basketball. I was like, all right, yes, another basketball fan. Man, we could have just done that for the whole hour.
Yeah.
Well, Art Bennett, thanks so much for joining me. If people are interested in the book or any work that you're doing, how can they get their hands on it? Anything to
Amazon, Art Bennett or Lorraine Bennett on Amazon. We got 6 books. Let's see if there's anything you like, and that'd be great. That would be wonderful. Yeah. So, thank you very much, Mario. It's great to be a part of this great apostolate. I'm honored to have been a part of it. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you. And so the final question I ask all my first-time guests is, what gives you hope?
Christ. That's it. Christ. Yeah.
Good answer. That's all it needs to be.
Alive and kicking. He's got a high tolerance for pain, however, which I'm not always wild about, but he gives me hope. Yeah.
Amen. Well,
Amen.
Art, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Oh, what a delight. Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you.